Hi, and good evening, everyone. My name is Shom Thivadi, and I use they, them pronouns, and I work at the Largo Kettering Library.
My name is Giovanni Martinez, and I use he, they pronouns. I work at the Spalding's Branch Library, and tonight we're honored to host Vishwas Pethe, author of Gay Crow Memoir. The event is part of Prince George's County Memorial Library System's celebration of both Asian Pacific American Heritage Month and Pride Month. You can learn more about our events and resources at pgcmls.info. Tonight's event is also co-sponsored by Prince George's County Office of Human Rights.
We're very lucky to be with Vishwas tonight. He is a longtime resident of the DMV area and has lived a truly extraordinary life. Originally from Maharashtra, India, Vishwas moved to the US shortly after college for work. Doctors gave Vishwas 1 year to live for 20 years of his life. 6 separate times, it looked as though death was imminent, but with an unflappable spirit, Vishwas was able to overcome these challenges despite incredible odds. Despite living with HIV/AIDS for 35 years, he has led an extraordinary life by every measure. From world travels to his 30-year marriage with a former Catholic priest, Joe, who is with us tonight as well, and to being one of the original developers of the app Grindr. Vishwas uses his memoir to describe the technique that he used to stay alive. I had the pleasure of meeting Vishwas through Kush DC, which is a LGBTQ plus South Asian organization based for folks in the DMV. Vishwas actually was one of the co-founders of this organization back in the 1990s. A few months ago, the book club for this organization got to read his memoir and hear Vishwas speak to our group. Reading and hearing about his life was an incredible experience. So we're all grateful that you, both in the audience in person and virtually, are here with us today to learn more from Vishwas.
Shom and I have some questions for us all to learn more about Vishwas. At the end, we'll have time for questions from the audience as well.
So let's start with the name of your book, Gay Crow. When I first saw the title, I assumed that it just had to do with sexuality, but very early on in the book, you explain a different, deeper meaning to it. So for people who might not have read the book yet, could you explain a bit more about the Gay Crow fable and how it relates to your outlook on life?
Sure. I'll read the book, front of the book, where it starts with the story of the Gay Crow. So there was once a kingdom ruled by a very unhappy king. One day, a visitor told him that a gay or happy crow lives in the jungle or forest. Intrigued, the king decided he told his soldiers to find the happy crow and throw him in jail. The soldiers reported to the king that even in jail, the crow remained happy. Cast him into the thrones, the king demanded. But even among the thorns, the crow sang and was happy. Put him in the hot oven, the king ordered. And if that doesn't make him unhappy, boil him in hot water. Nothing seemed to turn the crow from his happiness. Finally, the king relented and let the crow go free. The king declared to people, let us all be like this gay crow and find happiness in whatever circumstances we find ourselves. So this is a long story. The actual story is a little long. His punishments, they describe it in detail, but I just shortened the story. And you have to excuse my speaking voice because I have, through my stroke, which you will find out later, and I have speech difficulty. So sometimes I cannot remember words, but I'll remember in the later, but some trouble.
No worries.
Yeah.
So could you talk a bit more about how the Gay Crow fable connects to your outlook on life?
Yeah, so the Gay Crow, my uncle used to call me Gay Crow because he saw me playing with other students or other friends of mine, and I was always happy. And my uncle used to say, "How come you're happy?" So he used to say, "You're like a gay crow," and that kind of stuck in my mind. And many years later, when I decided to write a book, I remember that what is common between all those things is my attitude. The attitude that happiness only stays and unhappy thoughts will go away. So that stays in my mind. So uh, that's what the book is called.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that with us. So you structure your memoir as conversation between you and your psychologist, Carl. Across many cultures, particularly in South Asian communities, mental health is taboo and seeking care can be stigmatized. You write about your initial hesitation, your conversations with your husband on whether or not to try therapy, and your trial and error process of finding a therapist you liked. Tell us more about that process of starting and sustaining therapy. How did you ultimately decide to structure this book as a conversation between you and your therapist?
So it's true that in our community, it's seeking a psychologist is really looked down upon. But in this society, it's different because in our culture, where there are many people around us, we tend to uh, navigate to a person who is wise, and you go to wise person to get some uh, information from, or some way of saying things are right. And in this society, there's no one person like that. So here, the that's become a job of the psychologist. And then another thing is, in our society, we always look down for the people who go to psychologists. But here, people go to psychologists to get advice or to clear their mind or clear their thoughts. So in that sense, it's not a bad thing. I had same kind of fear. So I thought that I'll go to him, and about 2 or 3 times I'll see him, and then I'll just do my own thing. Uh, but it so happened that when I saw the car, and he was the third person I saw. When I saw him, and we just connected, and then I got interested in his business of psychology. So I started becoming interested in his business while he was working on my problem. So that's how I got into uh, the discussion with this problem.
You wrote that the society you grew up in Maharashtra, India, was not necessarily outwardly homophobic, but rather anything beyond heterosexuality was kept out of public life. Queerness was treated as though it just did not exist. But still, at one point, you brought home a man who you were dating to meet your parents when you were younger in India. Did that or subsequent cases of open relationships feel like a rebellious act? And with few examples at the time to lean on, how did you choose the path that you took?
So it didn't seem to me like a rebellious act. I was just being authentic, like I always was authentic. So to introduce someone important in my life to my mother sounded like a good thing to do. Uh, but I realized that she did not understand what was going on. And she said, he doesn't seem like a good person for you in terms of friendship, because he was much older than me. And Then I decided to leave that alone. But that doesn't mean my approach to people changed. Um, I've always been an authentic person, and I always think of good things that I see, and bad things don't occur to me. So I don't know why, but that's my gay grow attitude. Yeah.
In 2017, the Indian Supreme Court decriminalized homosexuality. The law in question was legacy of the British Penal Code. Um, while gender and sexual diversity have a long history in India, more societal progress is needed to ensure the dignity for all LGBTQ folks. How did you feel about the evolution and state of LGBTQ rights in India?
So I've lived here for about 40 years, some 43 years. But I didn't have much contact with Indian people. So I don't really know what happened in India because because of my HIV, being HIV positive, I couldn't go back to India because there's a lot of infections that can happen. So I stayed here. So I know the Indian uh, life, gay life, from a distance, and I cannot say what gays really experience there. Um, that's quite different than having known them. So I knew the gay people who came here and came out as gay, but that's only small portion of me. So I don't really know the answer to that. But um, I went to India in '91 for some family reasons, and then for 19 years I didn't go back. Then I went back for 2009 for my brother's wedding, and in that time frame, in India, I had no connection with Indian people, with gay people. So that's summarizes what I think. Okay.
You have been in the DC area across many different decades, and like I mentioned at the beginning, you were one of the members to found Coach DC back in the mid 1990s. How have you seen queer life evolve in the DC area across the decades? And are there any particular memories of the past that you remember fondly?
Hmm. The gay life changed a lot because when I was a gay and I came out, it means I didn't come out, but this is in our society I came out, and that time the the law was still there. The law that later um, became homosexuality was not criminal. So the criminal law was there, but it wasn't enforced criminal law. So from that point of view, we went to gay places, gay bars, gay restaurants. But outside that, you just became like a straight person. So you live like a straight person, and you in the evening when you go out, you became gay person. So that was different. Now it's much different now because it's legal and it's open, so people can become like they want to be. Is that what your question was?
Yeah, and you wrote about that in your memoir a bit too. I think how at work you weren't able really to disclose to many people about being gay, but also about being HIV positive. So, what was that process internally for you to compartmentalize those two parts of your lives?
Yeah, that thing was quite difficult. Um, Means I had to hide everything. I had to hide my sexuality, and more on top of that, I had to hide my uh, disease. So, for example, I used to take pills in the bathroom. I used to go to the bathroom and close the door and take the pills. So that was very difficult in that sense. But I never saw that as difficult. I thought that was just as another way of dealing with it. So to me, it was not since my gay crow attitude, everything that happened was good thing. So it didn't bother me that much while I was working there. But after I came out, then then I thought about those times, and I felt bad. But it was it was like then, yeah.
Um, in the book, you talk about going through many different HIV and AIDS treatments options, each with their own hurdles. For many years, you kept this process private from your employer. Tell us about that journey and how, as a gay crow, you kept going. How do you see your experience living as a gay man with AIDS through the late 80s and 90s compared to your experience living with it today?
So to say is in 80s and 90s, I kept it from the workplace totally hidden. And when gay people had to not disclose it to any person. So even gay people didn't understand it. They had a lot of stigma against it. Um, but somehow it didn't bother me. Somehow I just handled whatever was happening, and I never thought of it as negative thing.
How is it like being able to witness all of the marches and protests that were happening in the 80s and 90s, like Act Up, Speak Up, the, the church protests that happened in New York City? How was that like for you? Because you had to keep it obviously hidden while you were working.
I was watching them, and I felt their pain, but I couldn't relate to that. I couldn't become part of them. That was a difficult part. But a lot of protests were going on in New York, in here, and NIH against the NIH officials. Uh, but I couldn't do anything. Yeah, that is true.
You were also one of the original developers of the app Grindr. You write about how you sort of had a loose idea for it years before and then heard of the two men who were developing it and reached out to support their work. And for those who may not know, Grindr is a location-based dating app for gay, bi, trans, and queer people, as well as just men who have sex with men. So what do you think of Grindr's influence on the culture of the queer community, and how does that compare to what you envisioned when you started versus now?
So Grindr, I had an idea called proximate, which was supposed to be a proximal mate. But that idea I had in 2001, when there was no technology to achieve what I wanted to do. I thought of using cell phones, but not everyone had cell phones, and there was some GPS, but very wide distance. So there was no option to do that. But when Grindr came out and I saw that it was online, I immediately contacted the founder and said, I want to be a part of Grindr, is a part of the development team. And by then, I developed 11 different applications on the iPhone. So I was very familiar with the programming for the phone. And then initially they gave me just a spreadsheet. Then they gave me some other task. And then when iPad came out, then I said, you should convert it, Grindr to iPad. And they were not interested because not that many people had iPad. So I took the application and converted it to iPad. And I was doing all these things for free because I was on disability. So I couldn't take any money for that. So eventually, and the founder really felt bad. So eventually, he sent us to me and Joe to a cruise. And then later on, I worked on application called uh, blind, no, Blender, Blender.
Oh, yeah.
Uh, but- and later, when they consolidated all the people, that's when I no longer belong to uh, to the development group. But I think that application is a very useful thing to happen. Because if you look at the gay people, and you could tell who is gay and who is not. And if you're straight, then you see us in society, about half of the population, men or women, you see them as potential partners. And but gay people, you don't know anyone who is gay. So the grinder really opened that, and slowly that became the way to meet for more people. So in that sense, is good. I hear bad things about him, about the grinder or applications like that, but the criticism is not valid. Uh, People who don't like it don't have to use it, but for people, it's a tool to meet other people. Like in straight people, they have what is it?
Tinder.
Tinder, yeah, yeah. So that same as Grindr, and it all started with Grindr.
It's the original.
Yeah.
Was there ever a moment where you heard about the development of Grindr where you were kind of like, well, I want to be a part of this? Like, was there ever a moment where you just realized that you had to be a part of this?
Right when I saw it. Because I had the same idea before, and I wanted to do that. And there was no way to do it. And now someone else has done it at exactly what I want to do. So I said, yeah, I want to become part of this.
And I think you make a good distinction about how oftentimes in like gay or queer dating, you often have to make assumptions when it's meeting through in person what someone's sexuality is, and that can be a tasking, scary, even dangerous feat.
Yeah.
So having an app like that removes some of those dangers, or
Yeah.
for folks who might feel a bit more anxious socially, it makes sense what you're
Yeah,
saying, the
yeah.
unique value for queer people.
Yeah.
And there is also value in the sense that even if you don't necessarily use Grindr or apps like Grindr, there is a sense of community that you can get just knowing that an app like that
Yeah,
exists.
the fact that you know these people exist in your neighborhood. You may never see them, but you know that they are there. Yeah, I agree.
Art and expression seem to be a constant over the years for you. One of the few times you ever recall crying was when your father told you to pursue more technical classes instead of art classes. And he told you that you should pursue that instead of your passion and talent in visual arts. You also could have pursued a career in Indian classical music, and you fill your memoir with many poems written at different stages in your life. Do you experience a similar creative process across all the mediums, or do any of them hold any more value to you? And can you tell us more about what art means to you?
Art is a way to express yourself, and the painting and music and drawing and what's the third one? Three different.
Visual art.
Visual art. So there are different ways of expressing yourself, and you do that through one of the arts, one of the branches of the art. And I think they're all good and valid. In my particular case, I like drawing the most. And it later became painting. Uh, so, and I see everything as artful. I like the colors, and I like different things, the real people in different colors. So you can see my art book, my pictures, and a lot of different paintings are there. They are different colors. So I think that color is the main thing. But it can mean anything you want. Now my musical career didn't work because I came here, so it stopped. But I think art-wise, all art is good.
What is your creative process like? Like, what inspires you and what influences your art,
Hmm.
your creations?
That's fair to say. Some you see something and something just clicks, um, and then you want to develop that into a painting. But not everything you feel has any uh, uh, as a way to develop into painting. So I don't know if there is a specific thing.
In 2006, that's the year that you wrote that your viral load became undetectable, meaning that you would no longer transmit HIV to others. And this change was thanks to the antiviral drug Essentris, which you accessed through a trial with Georgetown University Hospital, right? Um, and you refer to the period after becoming undetectable as your life 2.0. Nearly 20 years later, though, still the concept of U equals U, meaning undetectable is untransmittable, it's still unknown to many people, and
Yeah.
there's still a lot of public health campaigns to try to educate folks about that. So I'm curious for you to share more about what that experience of entering Life 2.0 was like, on top of having to.
That's a different thing. Even today, people don't understand what that is. But back then, before I became undetectable with that Essentris, um, that was one of the times when I was the doctors had said they will not visit me, means I will not go for more visit after about a month. Means they're expecting me to die. And I started calling all sorts of things. I just picked up the phone book and I called every hospital and every drug company and every different places. And I used to call them up and ask them, do you have any medication for this? And everyone said no, no. But eventually I found one. And it's explained in my book. But the, the part about you equals you is new in a sense. When I first became undetectable, I didn't know that. I just said, I'm now sane. But I didn't know that I cannot transmit to others. So that kind of came out about 6 or 7 years ago. So last 6 or 7 years, people, you have to educate people what that means. And even if you educate them and they get it, but they say it may be true that it doesn't you don't want transmit, but I would rather not deal with it. Yeah. So it's still a process to bring on.
What advice would you have for people today who might be navigating an HIV diagnosis?
Today it's much different because back when I was diagnosed, it was a death sentence. And it was something that if the employer discovers you have HIV, you immediately lose your job. You lose where you're living. So now it's different because now there's medication. So people can live now with HIV and have full complete life. So I think people should not get it, but ones who have it uh, should not fear. There's nothing to be afraid of.
Um, Religion and spirituality play an interesting role in your life. While you grew up in a Hindu household, you also consider yourself an atheist and you're married to a Catholic priest. What role has your relationship with your husband played in helping you form your own belief system?
uh, I don't think of religion as anything different than profession. Like you do professionally, you may but become you may be a nurse or a airline pilot or a conductor. But I see that religion as one aspect of a person's life. And I don't see anything different than when I say that he is Catholic priest, but I was a programmer. I didn't see much difference in that. So from that point of view, it doesn't mean anything to me. But the person's personality is very important. And that's what it matters. So if someone says I'm Catholic, it's fine. But how they interact with each other, interact with me, that decides how I feel about them. Yeah. So my partner or husband, he didn't tell me something about how to live, and same way he feels that way.
Did you guys ever have any conflicts of like ideals? Like, was there ever a point where you guys had to just disagree, just based off your different viewpoints of life and religion and spirituality?
That's the gay bro talking.
Yeah, there may be, but I don't remember. It just like you said, gay crow song. I just remember what's good about life, what's good about interactions, and I just forget about other things. Now, if you recommend, if you remember something, I remember that thing happened about bad situation, but it doesn't really stay in my consciousness.
I think in the book you talked about that as well when you were climbing up the mountain with your friend, and you described it as the trip is like the worst possible experience ever, and you were just like, no, it's fine because I was there with you, my friend.
Yeah.
So we'll jump to welcome questions from the audience in a moment, but before that, we have one more question, and then we'll open it up to folks in the room. So start thinking if you have any questions you'd like to ask of Vishwas. But writing a book is a very long, arduous, and it can be a challenging process that can be very demanding and taxing on an author. What was your writing process like, and were there points where you doubted whether or not you wanted to finish it, or did you feel consistently motivated throughout the process?
I didn't feel motivated. I thought at times I had urge to write something, but then my what to write became a problem. Then I wrote some pieces of the story about my experience, but they didn't come together as collection. And then I thought of write a memoir, and mainly because of the pandemic. There was nothing else to do, so I decided to do that. But the writing about my life as this thing happened, then this thing happened, then this thing happened, in a series was kind of boring to me. And at the time, I had a ghostwriter. So he just suggested that I can I can write it like a dialogue between me and someone else. And that didn't make any sense to me because I thought memoir has to have one voice. And now you're introducing another voice. But the more I thought about it, they said, it may have something to do, some gist. So, so I tried different things, and he he introduced me to the way the dialogue between me and a psychologist, and then it slowly dawned on me that it makes sense. And then the more I looked at both of those things, then I said, yeah, that's the right thing to do. Yeah. But it took a while.
So now, are there any folks in the audience who have questions that y'all would like to ask of Vishwas?
So thank you so much. I didn't know anything about this until Giovanni invited me out, so thank you. As a young first-generation queer person, and specifically a South Asian queer person, I've found a lot of myself and my friends kind of coming in conflict with our parents about queerness and just LGBTQ people in general. And my question to you is, as someone from that older generation, do you have any advice for us in reaching some sort of middle ground or some sort of understanding with our parents or older generation in like queerness and LGBTQ people and those types of discussions?
I think the first of all, we have to accept ourselves. And when you totally accept yourself, then you just tell your parents or whoever it is that, oh, I just happen to be this, but nothing else, no other difference. And to me, that's how it helped. But I see so many people that their parents are set against being gay, and I don't really know how to do that. I was fortunate, very fortunate, that my parents never said no to me, and all my relations and my Indian families and the further relations, I'm open to all of them, and nobody said anything to me. But I don't notice that in other people. So I'm at loss, as you said. But one thing is sure, that you have to see yourself as valid, and then you can tell other people what you are. And if they say no, then you leave them alone. Slowly they'll come back.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think one of the beautiful things about being queer is we get to choose our family because we get to relate to people on a more intimate level just based off of our experiences as queer people. And being able to build your family and choose the people that you want around you is something that I feel is very unique to queer culture and something that is comforting because you know that even though you might feel alone in the moment, ultimately you're not going to be alone because there's going to be people around you who love you and relate to you.
That's true, yeah.
Any other folks have questions? Yeah.
I have a question inspired by the previous question. I think your story is very inspiring because it's one of sheer resilience. And I'm wondering what's your message to young people who might have a part of their identity that is stigmatized, whether that's their religion or a troubled past. What's your message to them to keep going and to persevere as you did?
That's a difficult question because I see that in people and I can't tell what it is, right? But I think if you totally accept yourself and just ignore any negative things, just look at what positive things happen and you go with that, and don't look at the negative things. Or let the negative wash over you, and you just look at the positive thing. That's the main go attitude. But I don't know how to do it. I don't know how to impart it to someone else. But I found that to be the key. We tend to accumulate those negative things and our brain keeps thinking about that, but we don't need to. Yeah.
Thank you.
And I think that rings true throughout different experiences you describe in your book, where even though there are a lot of things that to an outsider might seem like they're restricting what your life can or cannot look like, you have an ability to focus on what is and within your control and focus on what you do have power to influence in how your life is. And so finding the strength in those places where you have that autonomy is powerful.
Now, one thing too is I'm very analytical. So I don't have emotions, as many emotions. So I see that everything is logical. And with the emotions that I consider them to be not important. So that may be a flaw, but that helps in that sense.
Yes.
Thank you very much for sharing your story. I was particularly touched by the fact that you had to take your pills in the washroom in hiding. That was very telling and moving. Thank you. And I wonder if there is a connection between the hiddenness you had to experience and the hiddenness that a Catholic priest, at least traditionally, had to go through and still has to go through to be in the closet because of all the restrictions imposed by Christianity at large and by the Catholic Church in particular. So what is it like to be married to a Catholic priest? I mean, objectively speaking, a Catholic priest should not be married to anyone, a man or a woman. So it's a courageous act on the part of both of you. If you could tell us a little bit about that, probably you are experiencing in the present what the church likely will experience in 4 centuries from now.
Oh, can we get him in the picture?
Of course. Yeah.
Here is my husband. We can talk about Catholic. But I saw when we were going through that, I just took that as a given, these are parameters you live with. And whatever good was that in that, I accepted that. And other things I didn't. Here's my partner, husband.
I'll start my answer with a little example. When we got married back in 2015, after the ceremony, being a good Catholic priest, I said to Vishwas, well, the good news is we are no longer living in sin. But the bad news is I'm probably being excommunicated. That's just the reality that, priests do not get married. And in fact, the church never talks about married priests. They talk about priests who have attempted marriage. It's like, it didn't work. You may think it worked, but it didn't work because we don't allow that. But beyond that, Vishwas and I have totally different faith experiences. He was raised in India. His family are Hindus. He's kind of atheist. And that's fine, because those are attributes to this person, but it's not who this person is. And who this person is the one person I met in my life who I totally love and from whom I feel total acceptance. So all of those things that are a part of me in my faith, and I'm still very active in ministry through Dignity. I'm a priest presider for Dignity Liturgies. in Northern Virginia and Washington DC. So I still get to sermonize and sometimes pontificate, but mostly just give homilies. But the distinctions that we make based on attributes that people have are surface. Our relationships ought to be built on the core truth that motivates our lives. And for me, that core truth is see the good in others, recognize that nobody's perfect, and do your best to make your life and the lives of those around you even just a little bit better. And that's the success of religion, is that it taught people many ways of doing that. The failure of religion is that too often it never did that itself.
Thank you.
I actually wanted to ask you guys something. I had asked you guys earlier when it was just the four of us, but I want to ask because I want the audience to know. Was there ever a moment where you just realized that you were fundamentally in love with each other? Like, when did that moment where you said that?
It happened over postcards.
It was long distance. He was in Falls Church, Virginia, and I was in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, because I was an Air Force chaplain. And we communicated back and forth in postcards and short letters. And through that process, we realized that we were falling for each other. And it was very serious. And then when I came back from that deployment, we took a walk along the Potomac at the end of the cherry blossoms and just said it. I love you. And we meant it, and we still do.
Yeah.
And that never changed. The only thing that changed was it got deeper and stronger, because there's been 30 years of it.
Another question that we received from one of our online viewers, which you touched on a little bit, so I add to this question, but the question is, are you connected to the LGBTQ movement in India? But I'd like to add to that how you experienced connecting with South Asian Americans through Kush DC, what that was like for you seeing other queer younger people and generations after you, whether in India or here in the US.
In India, I have no connection, really. And that's a sad part. I'm trying to make connection with the people, with the groups through the book, but I'm not making any connection. But in this society, I have made connection with the Kush group, but it's not a day-to-day connection. But that's because we are older and we think differently. Our things are going to dinner with friends and things. And we have made so many friends, so we don't have time for these other friends. But there's connection there, but not as much as we like. Yeah.
And I think it's great then that you're writing this book to be able to reach broader audiences, and it'll have a lasting legacy across the world. Oh, yes.
Are there any points that stand out where your gay crow philosophy felt especially difficult and you wondered if it was really the best approach for you?
There was one situation where my gay crow totally failed. And that's when my brother, Sunavshu, when he first got divorced. And I could not handle that. And that took me a while. But that's one situation that I remember. But that's the only thing I remember, that my gay crow didn't actually didn't do it at all. And it took us like 5 years or something for us to talk to each other. Yeah. But otherwise, the gay crow was always active, except for this one situation.
And what brought you back?
I think, after all, he's my brother. So we had a common friend, Ed, um, who was in connection with me and him. And we used to find out about each other, what they're doing through him. And slowly we started talking to each other. And it took a while, but it's a difficult process.
Thank you for sharing.
Any other questions from the audience? We have backup questions, so don't feel pressured, but if anyone has something on their mind, feel free to share. One other question I had, towards the earlier part in the book, you mentioned, I think it was prior to your diagnosis, but you were still struggling to decide whether to stay in the US or whether you wanted to go back to India. And you write about how that was a very challenging process to think through. So I was wondering if you could share with us more about that process and what insights you might have for people currently navigating a decision like that.
Yeah, that was a difficult point. Difficult in the sense, I was in love with a person here, but everything else I had was back in India, and I was here as a visitor. But then I thought, then I made a list. I made a total list of all the positive things about this and all the negative things about it. But finally, what won out is being gay, because I really realized that being gay in India would have been very difficult. Of course, I would have done it if that was the decision. But for that decision, for that love, I decided to stay, and that's the thing. But for new people who want to who are trying to decide, I would say decide now, not procrastinate, because many Indian people, they say we'll decide later when or I'll earn money and then go back. So no, you decide now, go back and live the life there or live here. But don't stay on this in-between stage. Yeah.
Your very logical, methodical mindset is showing through the pros, cons list. Decide now, don't hesitate.
Yeah. And once I decided, it was just over.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that makes sense.
Do you think your gay crow philosophy is something that you have to do consciously, or is it something that just always exists, like in your
Yeah.
subconscious?
For me, it always exists. It only, when I leave here, I'll just remember the good things. And anything bad happens, I don't remember. So something in the brain. But it can be learned. It can be learned by people.
Another theme that you talk about through the book is your experiences living with disabilities, both through the physical sense of traveling while using a wheelchair, but also you write about when you were on disability and not being able to do other work for pay and navigating that. So I was wondering if you could talk more about that experience and anything that you wish people who don't live with disabilities would know to better understand what you went through.
Until my stroke, it was really not that difficult. After the stroke, I had really hard time deciding whether I want to live or not. And that's why I went to the psychologist. And that I haven't decided yet. But that was the question. Because there's so many, you want to live life like a full life, and with disability like I had, you cannot do that. So you have to decide that if you have lived enough life like you wanted, and at some point you just have to say no, give up. Not give up, but give up. So I don't know. Yeah.
Had you met other people, either in the community or folks that you know before, who also lived with disabilities and had that sort of decision that they had to go through, or was it more you as an individual?
Mostly me, because I don't know anyone else. I mean, there's some old people I know, but someone like someone who had full life and then suddenly it stopped. That I don't know the people.
Yeah. And you were lucky to have Joe to
Yeah.
support you as you thought through those questions.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you could tell the audience to give them like a reason to keep going? Like, what is your personal reasons to keep going and waking up in the morning, continuing to live your life?
Gay crow. Become like a gay crow. I don't know how exactly to do that, but there's just remember the good things that happen and just totally forget about bad things.
I think that's a good point. Are there any other questions from the audience, or? Okay. One other thing that I was curious about, you take pride and joy in having been able to travel a lot to many different parts of the world. Have you had a favorite trip or experience through your travels?
Australia.
Oh,
Yeah.
what was uniquely exciting about that?
I never thought that I'd go that far, but I managed to go there with my disability, of course, and just had a wonderful time. And the trip there and the atmosphere was quite different. And when we got back, we got back and after 2 days, whole country was shut down. So the pandemic started. So that was it remained in my mind as the best vacation we had. But if you look at which vacation is good, every vacation is good. Yeah.
Is there a particular memory from Australia that sticks out in particular?
Mostly, I met my cousin, and that's the interaction with the cousins and her children. That was very valuable.
Were you reuniting with her, or were you meeting her for the first time?
No, reunited with the cousin and the daughters. The daughters are now grown up. They were like first time. It was very sweet.
Another part I wanted to touch on, so you write about having your first art exhibit and sort of coming into that, even though it almost felt like a side hobby, not necessarily your main work in life, it was a very significant thing. So how did it feel to sort of have this exhibit where you had seen yourself as not an amateur, but that not being your main purpose in life?
It felt fulfilling.
Yeah, yeah. Did you ever think it would happen?
No, I never thought that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What led to that coming to be?
When I was going to a class. It was not a class, like a group. We did our own paintings, and in that, a friend of mine, a person who was in the class, he said he has a gallery, and when he saw my one painting, he said, I really like this, and if you do more of this kind, then I'll have them in the gallery. And then I did 21 of those, and that became the show.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a good place to end, seeing the beauty in your art and creative expression, both through your book, Gay Crow, and all different mediums. So thank you again so much for joining us today, Vishwas. It's really been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you so much to the audience for coming and supporting Vishwas and PGC MLS. Thank you so much.